Hello, it's me, Caitlin. Caitlin's got Parkinson's. This is one of those facial rambles, and I haven't scripted this. You might think, if you watch any of my other videos, then actually, to be honest, if you've seen me before, you've nobody to blame but yourself for watching this. If you've not seen me before, what I aim for is a sort of happy amateurism, if you'll pardon the expression. And I set the bar really low in YouTube terms, and I always manage to fail to achieve that low standard. So I think that pretty much sets the scene. Now, this is an odd one because it comes out of nothing. It just happened. Me and my mate were having a wargames night, and we were playing English Civil War. That's irrelevant in a way, except the two of us were together in a game, and we were having coffee, and we'd got cream-filled donuts, that vanilla stuff. Oh, I like them. So we're having them, and we make occasionally wargaming, which was interrupting the chat and conversation. And my mate said, I'm reading a book. And that was really the start of this weird journey we've been on, which has led to us doing a completely new war game in a period neither of us have ever done. And to be honest, I've been a gamer since 1972. By that I mean a formal going to a war games club gamer. So it's a long time. 53 years as we sit here now, and yet this just happened in 2 hours game, and it made me think about keeping your mind open as a gamer to what the possibilities are and the excitement that this generated. Now, I find this exciting. I have to warn you, if you're getting your hopes up, you might not. So, I'm reading a book, he says. Have you heard of a writer called Wilbur Smith? And actually, I had, when I was at college, 76-ish. Not when I was 76 years old, in 1976. I read a couple of Wilbur Smith's books. But the only thing I really remember is, no matter what the book's about, at some point they go to Africa. I remember once it went to ancient Africa, like flashbacks, and they were hunting elephants, the Carthaginians, which I found interesting. So I digress, as I'm going to do on a number of occasions. So I've read some Wilbur Smith books. Anyway, he told me about this one he's reading, and then we got on to Charles II, because apparently this book has a lot to do with the East India Company during the Anglo-Dutch Wars, something I know virtually nothing about, really. Well, that's not true. I know more about it now than I did at the time because of what happens next. And we got talking. Now, I know I'm a historian. I know my history. I know about Charles II. I know where he comes from. I know where he went. So I understand all that bit. And I like military history. Obviously, I'm a war gamer. But to be honest, the Stuarts, I'm not a big fan. But the English Civil War is my favourite period. Go figure. So we talked about that for a bit, and we were trying to sort of place what the armies be wearing, because he was saying I quite fancy doing this, like as a skirmish, because apparently the idea of the book, and don't ask me what the book's called because I've no idea, but apparently in the book there's like three pirate crews. And they're sort of, sometimes they work together, sometimes they're against each other. But there's 3 pirate crews, and he was saying, you could do it almost like Stargrave or 5 Parsecs from Home, which is a great space game if you don't know it. Where your crew would be the same people you might have on a spaceship, but you'd have them on your boat. That's an oar. Not an oar. That's an oar. Can you imagine if your oar were like that? Woo, what's happened? She's all that. Well, he's in trouble, mate. Universal signal for I'm sinking. A mast. I'm good with all the technical stuff. If I go like that, that's rigging. Yeah, so he was saying what uniform would the soldiers have worn, but you know, the East India Company or the Dutch India Company, Dutch East India Company. And I didn't know. I had no idea. I mean, the English Civil War's not big on uniforms, is it? There's odd regiments, like the Royal Regiments, and towards the end, the new model army starts to adapt and adopt and even begins to wear red during the sort of the parliamentary rule period. Well, I didn't know off the top of my head when the British Army starts to have standardised uniforms or what they look like. Now, as I say, I do English Civil War. He does Marlborough. So between the English Civil War ending, let's say, 1656, by the time it's all wrapped up, and Marlborough, it's quite a short period to go from virtually no uniforms to an army that you start to recognise as a modern army. Also, I think, which might be pertinent, a lot of us as wargamers, we want to know what uniforms people wore. What uniform did they wear? Well, sadly, it transpires, the East India Company, when it formed in Elizabethan times, were just mercenary ragtag Herberts. They didn't wear a uniform. And then even later, when it became the early East India Company, you had the British regular army wearing a sort of Marlburian moving into early Napoleonic type uniform. And you've got what they call the native army, which are Indian troops in British uniforms. And then they had what they call the European armies. And they were still these mercenaries. They weren't the East India Company. And they guarded treasure. They guarded stagecoaches and caravan travelling wagons of spices and things, protected little garrisons and forts and strong points. So they weren't a big force like they became. I mean, they became the biggest army in the world. They were a bigger army than Britain. They were a phenomenal thing, and corrupt and a bit dodgy by all accounts. But hey, you know. So we started researching, and we both went off, and with this, well, that's the idea. We're going to do this war game if it's feasible. And then I looked through on YouTube, and I found this site, and it was sort of like little paper cutouts of soldiers from some Victorian school book, I think. Well, it was paper soldiers anyway. And it was like a history of the British Army. So you started off with the very earliest ones who looked a bit like English Civil War soldiers, but those of them that were wearing coats were starting to wear red coats. And also there were the occasional regiments that looked a little bit like Marlburian light infantry. You also had men with halberds. Principally, you had musketeers. You didn't really have pike at this point in this army, from what I can gather. And then it goes on to Marlborough, and then it goes on and on and on. 7 Years' War and bits. So we looked at the years for this Anglo-Dutch War. And then looking online, I found a board game. And it's sort of like the War of the Grand Alliance. It's in, they're doing it now. They're sort of crowdfunding it. And when the guy opened the box, it was like a campaign map with little buildings and roads, a bit like Kingmaker, but modern. But he didn't go to Africa, India, where we wanted it to go, so that didn't really help. And then I looked at the Ghost Archipelago, the Frostgrave thing, because that's little boats and crews beetling about between islands, and I thought that might be useful. And then, as I was ambling around, I chatted to a mate of mine who's he's retired now, but he was a university professor of history. Not this period, but, history's history. Because I said to my mate Stu, and when we were wargaming, I said, there must be some guy somewhere at some university who spends all his life curating the period to do Anglo-Dutch wars, specifically related to East India Company, in the reign of Charles II, and no one's ever asked him a question. He's been sat in this little dusty room all his life. He's desperate for someone to read his dissertation that he did. And here we are wanting to read it, but we don't know where it is. It's fragile. So this mate of mine got back to me and he said, have you considered the Monmouth Rebellion? And I thought, yeah, now there's a point. The Monmouth Rebellion is quite a good one, isn't it? Because it's sort of the right age year, 1680-ish. Am I right? Because like I said, I haven't scripted this. I've not done loads of reference notes. So what I want you to do is to see how this evolves. So we go from coffee and a donut and somebody saying, I'm reading a Wilbur Smith book, to us both thinking, you know what, this could be quite exciting. We could both have a ship of pirates, a ship of fools, and we could have land forces, which were based on, I'm thinking, late English Civil War, Monmouth Rebellion, early Marlborough. Because I said to my wife, if I used my late English Civil War and he used his Marlborough, and we were very discerning about what we pinched, we probably could put enough men on the field for a little garrison force. It doesn't have to be fantastic, does it? I mean, I have a Royalist English Civil War unit who are wearing red coats. And this book with all these paper things on, a lot of the one group of the cavalry in this war were wearing those sort of typical lobster pot helmets with a cage down the front and leather, buff leather jackets. So I thought that was interesting as well. But the Monmouth Rebellion, you see, it could give you banners, and there are figures for that. So I looked them up, and I found two. I'm sure there are loads, and I apologise if you represent one of these other companies and you're doing these things, and I'm not mentioning them. It's just, I don't know. I haven't found you, but come and find me. Come and say hi, and you'll get a mention. I'll do it. So Foundry in Newark, they do figures for this period, mid-17th century. League of Augsburg, am I right in that? I'm guessing again. Austrian succession. You have to be careful if you start to look. Some historians talk about this Anglo-Dutch War as the 9 Years' War. I found out to my cost that there's another 9 Years' War about the same time, and it's in Ireland. It's not to do with the one you want to. So if you see 9 Years' War and you think, oh, that's where I'm going, probably not. So yeah, some clever beggar has named two wars the 9 Years' War and fails to tell you which is which. Sort of thing I'd do. Maybe it's the guy who names roads. You know, when you're driving round, or it's that road. What's that called? It's called the road. Okay, right. When I used to live up north, we lived near a place where Pendle Witches, and we used to was sort of Burnley way. And Pendle, you can see Pendle all around Burnley. But when you analyse the sort of roots of the word, pen is an ancient word for a hill, as is dun. So pendle is what's hill. And we've stuck hill on the end, so it's now called hill. Around here, there's places like Torrington. You think, oh, that's great. Can you imagine the bloke's walking along, and he looks at the village, and his mate says, well, go and ask that local what that's called. Comes by and says, it's called Torrington, that one. He says, right, write it on your map. Okay. But he says, down there's a little village down there. He said, I'm not going all that way. Cut it, I don't know, less Torrington. Okay, there's one up there as well. I'll call that one Greater Torrington. Yeah, but it's smaller than Torrington. Oh, don't worry about that. Nobody's going to go up there. That big hill. I've digressed somewhat. Yeah, so Monmouth Rebellion. Figures in that, certainly officers look great. English Civil War figures. Yeah. Then I looked on, North Star. Nearly forgot you. North Star. They seem to do some figures. I was going to say nice figures. All the North Star's figures are nice. I'm pretty sure they do the Monmouth Rebellion, mid-17th century type figures. I'm sure they do. And then I went online, and I went to, I wanted to get some pirates. And I were a bit disappointed, because they're all sort of steampunk, or ghosts, or, black sails, that sort of. And they weren't quite what I wanted. Like Johnny Depp Pirates of the Caribbean pirates. I wanted pirates. But I want my pirates to be a bit dashing. Certainly want my captain to be dashing. I'm going to call him Sir Pelham Cardew. And he's going to call his pirates the Gentlemen Adventurers. They're not going to be gentlemen. They're going to be a right bunch of Herberts. But I thought it was quite interesting. And I found a load of 3D printed stuff on Etsy, which are all sorts of pirate characters of all genders and points in between. Tall ones, short ones, fat ones, ones with one arm. That's a hook. So that's where we're at. So we've gone from coffee and donuts to wargaming, the East India Company, but not just the East India Company, in the reign of Charles II during the Anglo-Dutch Wars, a period which none of us had ever done, a period which neither of us knew anything about, and we've had loads and loads of fun finding out about it. So we've learnt lots, we've enjoyed doing the exploration and the fact-finding. We're going to enjoy getting these new figures, and we're only going to get, I don't know, I haven't talked to Stu about it, but probably, pirate crew of 10? That's more crew than you get in Stargrave. So, maybe a crew of 10? Assume that's like a jolly boat load for rowing ashore, and perhaps the same number of soldiers, so maybe 10 East India Company Raggedy mercenary guards, maybe 10 British, French, Dutch, whatever regulars, dressed in uniforms that are either English Civil War or early Marlborough or Monmouth Rebellion. Now, here's where you can come in, assuming you want to. But do you know any rules for this sort of period? Do any of you do it? Does anybody wargame Monmouth Rebellion? Firstly, that sounds likely. Does anybody know anything much about wargaming Charles II period, East India Company, Anglo-Dutch Wars? There's loads of stuff about the naval wars, the ships. Don't want that. I want land stuff. And it's going to be a skirmish game. But if you think of games like Gangs of Rome or Mordheim and Saga, a lot of these games now are teeny-weeny. I've always liked teeny-weeny games, mainly because used to can't afford big. When I was a youngster, or when I was first working and had the kids, couldn't afford big armies. Wargaming was a luxury, and I needed money for necessities. So skirmish gaming is right from the 70s has been what I did. I didn't always think it was. Didn't call it that. We thought we were having a battle, but we weren't really, because we didn't have the men for that sort of size thing. So this has been a 20-minute ramble about coffee and donuts equals new wargame. Thought you might be interested. So, in the spirit of life in general, I'm going to say, draw Chuck.